Well, welcome to Christ and Culture. This is Pastor Jeff Short, and today we're going to be jumping into a topic that's relevant today, right at this time. I'm not sure when you're watching this or where you're watching this. If you're from outside the United States, this may not be as totally relevant to your situation as it is here, but we are approaching the 2020 election. And I wanted to deal with a topic that comes up every 4 years, and that is how neutral should pastors and church leaders be in respect to presidential elections and party politics. Now, for most of the history of this country, it has been most of the policies of pastors is to somewhat stay neutral, because you had two parties that were more or less the same in their worldview, only they differed on different issues. And mostly it differed, for example, most of the 20th century, it was differing on economic issues. If you were a Democrat or a Republican, you had differences. And even up to like around the 60s, into the 70s, you could actually be a Christian sitting in the pew next to a person in your same church who was of the opposite party, but you differed on maybe policies, economic policies, immigration status of people coming in from different countries, and so forth. There were practical, pragmatic decisions that had to be made in the nation at the government level, and Christians could differ on those and still hold to a basic Christian worldview. Today, however, that is totally changed. Today, we have two parties that are coming from two entirely different worldviews. The Republican Party is coming from a worldview that more or less is trying to hold on to and preserve a basic judeo-Christian position on the world. We believe, and I consider myself more of a Republican-leaning person than a Democrat-leaning person, and I'll show you in illustration the things that I've had to grapple with as a Christian leader. The Republican Party is standing against the slaughter of children in the womb of abortion. Okay, that's a big issue for us Christians in this country right now. And so the basic understanding is that unless we don't fix this problem, imagine this, an entire segment of our population here in the United States, millions and millions of these persons are being killed, slaughtered, butchered, blood running, gore, parts of bodies falling into the dumpster. This is taking place every day in the United States, and it's being taken place under the coverage or imprimatur of the legal system. We legally allow this to take place since 1973 in this country, the Supreme Court decision that legalized abortion, Roe v. Wade. So the Christian understanding of this is that unless this specific problem is addressed and corrected, this nation has no future hope. Donald Trump, presidential candidate for the Republicans, says that he wants to make America great again. MAGA, you see the red MAGA hats. Make America great again. It will never happen. America will never move forward unless it deals with its number one sin, and that is abortion, the blood of innocent children. That is, if you read the Old Testament, you will see that the blood of the innocents is a major, major point that God brings judgment upon a nation. If the ancient people were beginning to sacrifice their children to Baal God on the fiery altar of Baal, that was one of the things that provoked God to bring judgment upon the ancient Jews. And of course, God would bring judgment upon the pagan nations as well for these gross atrocities, especially to the innocent, to the babies. And so here in the United States, Our number one problem is that we have blood flowing in the streets from the innocent children. Okay, so we're never going to get great again, if we ever were. We're never going to become great. We're never going to even survive into the future unless we take care of that ugly, terrible, awful sin of abortion in our country. And there's only one party in the United States that's even making any kind of motions to do that, and that's Republicans. On the other hand, the Democratic Party, and doesn't matter what their positions are on labor, it doesn't matter what their position is on immigration, they are the party of abortion, and they seek to strip away any laws prohibiting abortion. Every time there's any kind of law passed in any state trying to restrict abortion, even if the law tries to restrict killing the baby after it's been born accidentally from a botched abortion, the Democrats want that doctor and that woman to make a decision whether they want that baby alive or not. They want to actually legalize infanticide. They want to allow the doctor to let that baby die on that cold plate on the table, and the nurse go away and the doctor go out of the room, and then the baby dies of its own injuries. They don't even want to help the baby after it's been born. That is what the Democrats want. So the Democrats are the party of abortion. They're the party with blood on their hands because they've been promoting this for the last 3 or 4 decades. And so as pastors, as Christian leaders, as Christians in churches, it's not the case where you can have a person who is a Democrat sitting right next to a person who is a Republican, and as a pastor go to the pulpit and say, well, I am neutral on this. I'm not going to tell you who to vote for, and I'm not going to tell you which party to vote for, because there are some good issues that the Republicans are strong on, and then there are bad issues that the Republicans are strong on, and then there are good issues that the Democrats are strong on, and then there are issues that the Democrats are weak on. And so you have to weigh that yourself as an individual Christian, and any decision you make as whether you want to vote Democrat or Republican, that's totally up to you, and it's totally acceptable in the Christian worldview. No, wrong, false, 100%. That's the way it used to be. That's the way it was when both parties held to the basic, simple Christian worldview, the judeo-Christian worldview. Now, a lot of the people in these parties in the past, and even today, don't actually have their lives committed to Jesus Christ, but they're following a worldview trajectory. There are many Republicans today, for example, who are not Christians, but they're still conserving that basic Judeo-Christian worldview that teaches that every individual is made in the image of God. Every individual. The baby in the womb is made in the image of God. The senior citizen at the end of their life in a nursing home is made in the image of God. The handicapped person is made in the image of God. Every human being at every stage of development, whether it's at conception or at the end of life, all are made in the image of God. That's what our Bible teaches us in Genesis. And so that's where Christianity is working from. Now, the other worldview that the Democrats are following, and you can look this up, you can do the research, they don't hold to the basic Christian worldview. Now, you may say, well, there are Christians who are Democrats and they hold to the Christian worldview. Well, if they are, then they're grossly inconsistent, because if you hold to a Christian worldview, you will not be empowering politicians to kill babies. You will not be empowering politicians to break down or tear down all restrictions on abortion. In fact, if you're a Christian and you are consistently living out your Christian faith and Christian teachings and the doctrines of truth that God has revealed in the Bible, you will be opposed to abortion and you will not vote for abortion candidates. There are people in ethnic communities in this country who have been taken captive by the Democratic Party, and they will vote for Democratic Party against their Christian convictions. They've made an idol of the Democratic Party, and they are blindly and foolishly following the rhetoric that is being put upon them by the Democratic leadership that, oh, we're for you. You're not for anyone if you're for abortion. And so as pastors, we have to look at it as this is not two neutral parties. These are two not neutral candidates running for president. We are not in that day and time anymore. We could do that back, say, in the 1960s presidential race between John Kennedy and Richard Nixon. John Kennedy, the Democrat, Richard Nixon, the Republican. If you were a Christian, you could be sitting next to someone who was going to be voting for Richard Nixon, and you could be voting for John F. Kennedy. And you would have differences in why you voted that way for your candidate, and the other person would have reasons why they would vote that way for their candidate. And as a Christian, you could legitimately vote for one or the other because there wasn't this worldview divide. John F. Kennedy was not trying to kill babies in the womb with abortion. He was not standing for that practice, that abominable practice. Richard Nixon was not defending the baby's life in the womb because this issue, this abortion issue, wasn't even an issue in 1960. So there wasn't a tension between the parties as far as a worldview is concerned. John F. Kennedy, as a Democrat, was not pushing and promoting the perversion of marriage with the so-called gay marriage. He was not pushing the confusion of the sexes with this transgenderism that the Democrats are now pushing and promoting and doing everything they can to promote. John F. Kennedy was a part of the older judeo-christian tradition, and this transgenderism would never have occurred to him, and pushing for the so-called gay marriage or marriage equality, as the euphemism is, would have never occurred to the Democrats and John Kennedy, even though he was running on the Democratic ticket. And so as a Christian, you could sit in your church, and as a pastor, you could stand in front and say, I don't have any wisdom to tell you as far as John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon. Use your best Christian conscience because they're both qualified candidates for this office. They both have experience, and it boils down to your policy preferences as to which one you will vote for. So just go out and vote. Okay, if you're a Christian pastor today, and you say that same thing today, if you say between the Democratic Joe Biden and the Republican Donald Trump, they're both very close on their worldview perspectives, and it's just a matter of policy preferences between them, and so vote for whomever you choose, whichever candidate seems to appeal to you best. You would be doing a disservice. You would actually be giving foolish advice to your congregation. It isn't the case. It is not the case that Joe Biden and Donald Trump are coming from the same perspective. They are coming from totally opposite perspectives because Donald Trump is representing that remnant of the Judeo-Christian ethic and worldview in his platform, in the Republican platform, and in his policies. He is trying to stop abortion. He is trying to appoint judges who will stop abortion. He is trying to stop the radical LGBTQ sexual revolution that's taking place. He is trying to bring common sense and the basic Judeo-Christian perspective into government. Now, does he do everything right in his policy decisions and especially in his style and manner? No, he is far from perfect. He is a very flawed individual. In fact, one of the problems is that he makes things harder for himself because he puts his personality and his ego and his opinions out there with his incessant tweeting and comments and stirring up controversy and so on and so forth. And this is working against him. But as far as his actual, what he stands for and promotes, it's actually within the basic Judeo-Christian flow. Now, on the other side of the aisle, the Democrat candidate, Joe Biden used to be and used to stand in the Judeo-Christian tradition 40, 50 years ago. But what Joe Biden has done is he has allowed his party to lead him. So as the Democrats have departed from Judeo-Christian values, they no longer hold to the image of God in everyone belief. They don't hold to the image of God that the baby in the womb is a person that deserves protection under the law. They totally disregard that. And Joe Biden, in his old age and during his adulthood, he has allowed himself to go wherever the Democratic Party has led him. And he has followed in the wrong direction. So now he's taking a very anti-Christian worldview and holding to that. So you might say that his worldview is more pragmatism. It's like it's not Christian, it's not anti-Christian, it's whatever will win him votes for the Democratic nomination. And he's actually being a pawn of higher forces, higher powers, you might say. The prince of darkness and the rulers of the airs and the power, Satan himself, is influencing a lot of people today to sin, to rebel against God, to do things that are unthinkable. So Joe Biden, for example, was the first major politician to come out in favor of so-called gay marriage in 2012 while he was vice president of President Obama. And so he actually pulled the party and pulled the President Obama at the time in the direction of legalizing gay marriage. Well, if he were standing in the Judeo-Christian tradition and worldview, he would never, ever advocate for the perversion and the profanation of marriage. I mean, God looks very disfavorably on any individuals or any nations that would try to profane the basic institution of marriage that he established with Adam and Eve in the garden. If you look throughout the Old Testament and in the New Testament, you will find opposition, godly opposition to the perversion of marriage and perversion of sexuality with homosexuality. Well, Joe Biden fully embraces that and fully promotes that now and teaches that that's perfectly fine. So you have this clear divide between the democratic secular vision of reality, the worldview, secular democratic vision of reality, and the remnants, I will say, the basic remnants of the Judeo-Christian worldview in the Republican Party. Now, I'm not saying the Republican Party will always be this way. It could be in 20 years, it could be even 10 years, if the Republican Party gives up its commitment to the pro-life cause, if the Republican Party turns its back on pro-life Christians and says we're going to embrace fully the abortion practice because that will win us votes or whatever, or if they embrace the so-called gay marriage belief now, then Christians who are Republicans will abandon the Republicans. And I will gladly ban the Republicans. I hope it never comes to that point, because right now the only decent party, the only option for a Christian, a consistent Christian, is the Republican Party, as flawed as it is, and it is flawed. And the only decent political presidential candidate is Donald Trump, as flawed as he is. I wish I didn't have that option. I wish there were a better candidate than Donald Trump, but he does represent that older Judeo-Christian worldview perspective, and he is defending our basic worldview issues, our socially conservative worldview issues. Now, there are some pastors who want to say, well, you can be neutral about this. For example, Timothy Keller, pastor of Circle Church in Manhattan, New York, basically communicates that The Democrats are really strong on some things, and the Republicans are really strong on other things. And so he can imagine that people who are Christians would be voting for Democrats and people would be voting Republican, just depending on what you emphasize. That is a wrong, muddle-headed way of thinking about things because it doesn't put issues in a hierarchy. Let's say, for example, that Republicans are wrong on the immigration status laws. I don't believe they are. I believe there's a debate to be had, and it's still ongoing. But let's just say that the Democrats are right in saying that we should open up our borders and make it pretty easy to get in and not put very high standards or restrictions against entry into our country. And if people sneak in, kind of just turn your head and wink at them and don't really go after them and don't enforce the borders and just let people trickle in and trickle out and not really. Let's say the Democrats are right about that. I don't believe they are, but let's say they are. Okay. Well, that would be an example of an issue that you could say, okay, the Republicans are wrong on that, but is that the highest issue that we face as a nation? Now, some people think it is. I can't see how border policy is the highest issue that the nation faces. Why? Because I don't see God bringing down judgment and wrath and cursing this nation based on our border policy. And the reason I don't is because there's something a lot bigger than whether a person crosses the border easily or finds it difficult. And that is killing unborn babies in the womb, slaughtering innocent human beings, persons made in the image of God, with abortion. That is a higher priority, right? That's a higher priority. It's an issue of life and death, and involves thousands and thousands of babies every year. And it involves millions of people, unborn children, every year. So this definitely is a higher up level issue than border patrol, border policy. So to just say, well, the Republicans are good on abortion, but then the Democrats are good on immigration. I think I'm going to go with the Democrats because they're good on immigration. Or the Democrats are better on helping people up the economic ladder, or are better with programs that help women who are pregnant and are raising children, or whatever. There are all kinds of issues. And I would say, unless we deal with the issue of abortion, unless we stop the killing of unborn children, we won't have a nation to govern. There won't be need for any elections because we won't have a nation, because God will come in and take us out of the land like he did the ancient Jews, or he will just totally destroy this whole nation in a heap of rubble like he did Sodom and Gomorrah because of our higher level sins. We have to deal with this issue of abortion. So if you're in a church and you have people who are voting Democratic or voting for Joe Biden because he's good on this, that, or the other issues, I would just say to you, what issue is more important than stopping mass slaughter every day, thousands of babies every day killed? There is no higher issue. That is the top issue from a Christian perspective. Now, if you don't believe that people are made in the image of God, if you believe that people are simply and only products of evolution, that they're just higher animals, and if you believe, now there were government systems that totally believe that and still do. The Chinese Communist government right now, atheistic, communist, materialistic, atheist government, they believe that people are just higher animals, products of evolution. There's nothing special. There's nothing sacred about each individual. They don't believe in the soul. They don't believe that we are made in the image of God. And neither did the Soviet communists believe that. And so they slaughtered millions of people to achieve their policy goals. The same way with China. Right now, they're slaughtering thousands of people and taking away their basic human rights because they don't believe in the inherent dignity and worth of each individual, like the Christian worldview does. Well, if you're promoting abortion, if you're promoting the slaughter of innocent children in the womb, you don't believe in the inherent dignity of the person. You don't believe that each baby in the womb is made in the image of God, and so you believe you can do with that baby whatever you want. Well, that's not Christian. So if you're a Christian and you're saying that you promote the Democratic Party, you're not acting like a Christian. You're not thinking like a Christian. If you're going to vote for Joe Biden and you think that he's got better policies on some of these lower issues or economic plans, you think he's got a better economic plan or something, you're not thinking Christianly, because the first and foremost thing that we have to deal with in this country is the slaughter of innocent children. This has to stop. If it doesn't stop, it doesn't really matter about all these other things, because we're not going to have a nation here. We're not going to be a nation, because the good Lord is going to come in and judge us for our sins. Now, if you read through the Old Testament, that's something that God does. He comes in and judges nations, and he will wipe us out and take us off the face of the earth. In fact, the Old Testament talks about the land vomiting out its inhabitants because of the sins. That's what happened in the Promised Land when the Jews came in, and the pagan nations who had no God, who didn't have the true God, they were carrying out all these abominations and sins and evil and wickedness. And it says that God, the land itself, due to God's created order, vomited out the people because of their sins. Well, that's what's going to happen to the United States. That's what's going to happen to the Western world. The people of the land are going to be vomited out of their own land because they refuse to follow God's commands about basic human rights and stopping the slaughter of the children in the womb. And the whole thing about the profanation of marriage, that is a new problem that we have in this country to add on top of all of the other sins. 10 years ago, the big battle was to stop abortion. We haven't stopped it. Now we have an added abomination that we have to stop, or else God will bring judgment. Again, recall in the Old Testament, the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Why were they judged? Because of their sexual, abominable perversity practices. And so, do you think the same God that judged Sodom and Gomorrah is going to say to the United States, oh, I'm not going to do anything to you because you're the best nation in the world? No, he's going to do the same judgment to us that Sodom and Gomorrah got, because we're doing very much the same perversities and promoting the same perversities. So if you're a Christian, you are not going to line yourself up with the Democratic Party. You are not going to line yourself up with Joe Biden, and you're not going to be empowering these leaders to promote the sins that will eventually destroy this country. You're going to say, no, I'm going to either not vote at all as a protest, or I'm going to vote for some no-name candidate as a protest, or I'm going to vote for the Republican candidate, Trump. But you will have to account to God Almighty why you promoted and empowered leaders who are promoting the sin of abortion and the sin of gay marriage. You will have to give an account to God, and I wouldn't want to be there when you have to explain that. Well, I hope that this has been a helpful commentary, and I hope to see you back next week on another edition of Christ and Culture. God bless.